So we are going to be able to lead things off. And decent enough hand to keep. One thing about this hand is you're actually not that excited to be on the play because you just want to get your opponent's hand as far down as quickly as possible. So you want to force your opponent down to say one card in hand. And if you're on the draw, it's easier to do that. But yeah, so I'm not actually sure. There's probably some matchups where you want to be on the draw with this deck. So I should probably think about that more often. But just the conventional wisdom, playing Constructed Magic is to be on the play. It's very, very rare that it's correct to be on the draw. So I think a lot of players will not actually choose to draw. But with this deck, we do have double Wrench Mine. So Wrench Mine is very solid. Our opponent's probably going to take a Wrench Mine unless they have something that they really need to get down on turn 2. Maybe they take the Fatal Push. But it is going to be a Wrench Mine. So we're going to be able to Wrench Mine our opponent. And that should be a nice opportunity to whittle away at our opponent's hand. We don't have a way of actually closing the game out yet, but so 2 removal spells discarded. That makes perfect sense. They're not that good against our deck. We do have Mutavault beatdowns available to us, but not traditionally winning with creatures. But although, here's a Mishra's Bauble. I wonder if our opponent had that last turn. Because one of the clauses on Wrenchbind is you can discard an artifact instead of 2 cards. Interesting. So we could Smallpox here. But I think... Well, I think there is definitely a benefit to playing the Smallpox. The issue is we don't really have any great discards. So I think I'd rather go for this Raven's Crime. And the reason why I say we don't have that many great discards is because if we discard the Fatal Push, then what if our opponent just untaps and plays a creature at some point? Then we no longer have removal at the ready for an opposing threat. Now, this way our opponent could still go land plus, say, Liliana the Veil. That would be worst case scenario. But if our opponent does play a creature, then we're getting a creature off the opponent's side of the board with our Smallpox. Yeah, I think I am just going to go ahead and use the Smallpox here. It is going to mean we're going to be going down to 1 land, but we can play the Rack next turn. And it looks like our opponent also missed a land drop there. So we can operate off of 1 land. So I'm going to play the Rack here. Next turn I'm going to go for the Thoughtseize just to get in the 1 point of damage right away. And obviously we're hoping that our opponent doesn't get a powerful threat into play. Because once a card is on the battlefield in these types of scenarios, it's hard to get it off the battlefield. So let's take a look at what our opponent's working with. Okay, so we do see the Liliana of the Veil. However, our opponent's only got one land, so I'm going to take the Grimflayer. Leaving the Bonfire of the Dam, which is probably the card our opponent's just going to immediately discard if we go for Raven's Crime. It's likely that Liliana of the Veil was the card our opponent has been holding for a while now. So I'm going to hold the Swamp in hand. We might want to discard it to a Raven's Crime. It's just going to kind of depend how our draws pan out and what our opponent does. Like if they play a land, we kind of need to make them discard. So is this a Jund deck? That's kind of a question. Or is it a Death Shadow deck? So we found Liliana of the Veil. That makes me want to play this land more. So I am going to play it. That's going to mean that if we draw a land, we can play Lily and try to lock up the game that way. Which I think is a good enough reason to play the land. And there's a Grimflayer. So now, yeah, now if we draw the land, it's going to be really good. And there it is. So we can now make our opponent sacrifice this Grimflayer. And hopefully our opponent does not get rid of the Lily, so then we can just start plussing it and wrap the game up that way. Okay, another Grimflayer. Well, at this point, the Rack is actually threatening to just kind of end the game. So we can make our opponent discard their entire hand. So I'm going to do that by using the Funeral Charm now, then plussing the Liliana. And we see a Faithless Looting get discarded. Interesting. Okay. Well, our opponent's going to go down to 6. Then they're kind of forced into a situation where they want to attack our face, but they may not be able to because they need to worry about the Liliana. Alright, so now we know for sure it's a Death Shadow deck. But it's a Jund Death Shadow deck, which isn't something you see that often these days. So we'll see where this Grimflayer is heading. I suspect it well, our opponent may feel like they need to top deck something. If they attack us, then yeah, this is a really interesting play. I kind of like the decision. I'm not sure exactly what they're hoping to draw. So we can now minus the Lily, take out the Grimflayer, but they still have this Death Shadow, which is going to be a 10-10. But the question is, how do they deal us 13? I guess they're looking for a Lightning Bolt. If they find Lightning Bolt is going to kill us in this spot, I believe. That is definitely the reason why they're going to 3 on their next turn is due to the Rack. So that makes the Death Shadow a 10-10. We're forced to Liliana away the Grimflayer. Now, they may not actually go to 3, though, because if we don't find an actual discard spell, they won't go to 3. So there's a lot of variables at play here. Well, actually, no, sorry. They have 0 cards in hand, so they're automatically going to 3. If we draw the Rack or Shrieking Affliction, then it's game over. But it looks like they're putting a card on top, so that is extremely scary. very scary, but we still have to take the same line of forcing our opponent to discard. Now, maybe it's a card like Abrupt Decay that gets rid of the rack. That would also be unfortunate. I don't think there's really any benefit to playing this swamp. So I'm just going to hope that that card that got put on top does not kill us, because we have no other options at this point. So we take 10, and we can... Okay, so we're going to retrace the Raven's Crime. We're going to see what this last card is right here, probably. And this is going to be the game, one way or the other. Don't be an Abrupt Decay. Oh, no. Alright, well. Yeah. And even this turn, if we could have drawn another The Rack or Shrieking Affliction. Interesting game there. I like our opponent's attack to the face with the Grimflayer. That was a smart attack. That was a very smart attack. Looking back on it, that probably won our opponent that game. In fact, it did win our opponent that game. But anyways, sideboarding. So we are against Jund Death Shadow on the play. So we have access to more removal. We can board in Fatal Push, and Ratchet Bomb is another card we have access to. So I think I like those more than a card like Ensnaring Bridge. Or even Dismember. Dismember doesn't necessarily kill a Death Shadow. It depends how big that Death Shadow gets. Although I guess the rack in this matchup, the Ratchet Bomb, it can get rid of lilies and stuff like that, but we may not want it because we don't want to get rid of our own copies of the rack and Shrieking Affliction. That would be quite annoying. And Snaring Bridge seems fine. Short Fang. We probably don't want Nezumi Short Fang in this matchup. I think we want to go... We could go up to Delirium Skins. On the play, it seems pretty solid. Just have at least one Delirium Skins, if not more than one. I think we go more than one skins here. Kind of want all three on the play, because we need a critical mass of discard spells. Alright, I'm going to cut the bridge because we know our opponent has these Abrupt Decay type cards. Possibly is going to be boarding in more removal like Maelstrom Pulses. And I think we want these Delirium Skins because we want to just cut our opponent off cards as quickly and aggressively as we can. So like this hand, Delirium Skins would be great in. Yeah, we're going to keep this. Inquisition into Wrench Mine into, you know, more stuff of some nature. Alright, so our opponent has 2 black-red lands. We also see Mishra's Bauble. Bauble is very good against Wrench Mine specifically. I kind of want to take it for that reason. But we could also just take the Faithless Looting, even though... No, I'm going to take the Mishra's Bauble. Faithless Looting is card disadvantage for our opponent. I don't think we can... I think we have to let our opponent cast the Faithless Looting here, even though it could mean finding that green source. So So we are going to be looking for removal. Our opponent does have a creature heavy hand. Although that's pretty good news. Our opponent just had to discard 2 creatures. So they may not have found the green source. So this is going to make them, make some tough decisions in terms of what to keep in hand. If they had that Mishra's Bauble, if they had slow rolled the Mishra's Bauble, then that would be a good time to just discard Bauble. But it's going to be a Goyf and a Blackleaf Cliffs. Okay. So I think this is going according to plan. Okay, Inquisition, that's pretty good. So that's going to probably take away... Well, I could see arguments to both cards. The Rack isn't... Yeah, so it's going to be Fatal Push. Our opponent probably has something like a Goyf or a Grimflayer in hand right now. We found Raven's Crime, so we can go ahead and force the issue. And now that we've found Raven's Crime, I think the tables are starting to turn. Was that a swamp our opponent discarded? So I guess they decided not to play out that swamp. But I think we want to just play Mutavault, play the Rack, and start working on our opponent's life total. We see Seal of Primordium, by the way, as another answer to our win conditions. Okay, so Spellbomb is pretty good because it can force us to exile Raven's... can force Raven's Crime to be exiled. Blackmail, fine pickup. And it was a Grimflayer, which makes sense as the last card our opponent was holding. So I think we're in a pretty solid spot. So there goes our Raven's Crime, which means we don't have that reoccurring source of discard. So the Spellbomb is definitely good, but our opponent's still stuck on 1 land. There's a Smallpox. That's actually pretty attractive play, yeah. I'm just going to go for it. This is going to mean our opponent has 0 lands in play, but we still have a Mutavault. And we see our opponent has kept in their own discard spells against us, which is worth noting for Game 3, which we hopefully will get to. Hopefully we can close the deal out here and get to a Game 3. However, our opponent is still live to just go land Death Shadow. That's still a thing. And we want to draw another swamp here. Yeah, so we want to be able to go ahead and Wrench Mine away our opponent's hand. And this is kind of the ultimate board state where our opponent just literally has nothing except a Mishra's Bauble. So I think we've got this wrapped up. I don't see how our opponent gets out of it. And in fact, they are dead pretty much on board. They can draw Lightning Bolt or something, but yeah. Okay. So, preparing for game 3. I think we do want the bridge for game 3. Delirium Skins, not so sure. Dismember as another removal spell seems fine. Nixithid as just a big creature. Funeral Charm is also an option. Nah, I think I'm just going to go with this configuration. Not going to change too much. Deck's been pretty smooth. I could see Bantu's Last Reckoning. There's definitely an argument to be made there, but our opponent's normally not going wide with creatures in this matchup. Did leave in a Delirium Skins and have it in hand, so we'll see how that plays out. Looks like our opponent has a turn 1 discard spell. So we'll see how they want to attack this hand. We can play from a couple of different angles. So yeah, I think our hand's pretty solid. They may want to just get that Smallpox out of there, but if they do, we want to be able to Thoughtseize our opponent because we want to be able to play with that perfect information. So I think that Smallpox and Thoughtseize are the most likely cards our opponent's considering. Not surprised to see the Smallpox taken. Alright, so our opponent's just got lands here. We're clearly taking that Goyf away. And now we just kind of have to cross our fingers and hope that if our opponent draws a threat, we then draw an answer to that threat. But hopefully our opponent doesn't draw a creature, and we can force the issue with our discard spells. Okay, Seal of Primordium. So that's not too bad. And there's a Wrench Mine, so I'm going to definitely use that here. And now our opponent's hand, now we've got into the spot where our opponent is playing off the top. But we need some help though, because we're not winning this game anytime soon is the big issue. So we really would like something like a Liliana or an Nixithid even, to be able to pressure our opponent. Unfortunately, not that fortunate. Well, I spoke too soon. So I am going to go ahead and use the Raven's Crime here, just in case that one card was an Abrupt Decay, which is a possibility in my mind. Okay. It was a Tarfire. But even then, we're happy to be taking this line. So now we can use this Liliana of the Veil as a win condition, more or less. And yeah, the Delirium Skin's not really pulling its weight anymore. Okay, so there goes the Spell Bomb. Makes sense. So we're not going to have access to our Raven's Crime, which is pretty unfortunate. Alright, so our opponent's thought seizing. We're perfectly happy with that. So it's just draw go now, which favors our opponent. But, well, it's not exactly draw go, of course, because we do have a Liliana of the Veil in play. Pretty much have no use for all these lands at this point, but I'm just going to go ahead and play them. Now, if our opponent does draw a creature here, the nice thing is we can also -2 Lily. So we've got some flexibility in terms of how we use this Liliana. But we're kind of all in on the planeswalker here at the moment. And that was a nice draw because it's going to force our opponent to use their seal. And our opponent correctly realized that Faithless Looting isn't really doing anything here, because our opponent just discards the cards that they draw, and they're not actually getting any cards into their hand with a Faithless Looting. Although our opponent did peel a Tarmogoyf. So we can -2 the Lily to get that off the battlefield. And that seems worth it. Basically seems obligatory to make that play. We'd really like a Mutavault to be able to, or another Shrieking Affliction, but we're ahead until our opponent top decks out of this, if they do. Okay, so there is a Faithless Looting. And it looks like our opponent just found lands off the Faithless Looting, so that works out in our favor. And unfortunately, our opponent noticeably does have that Ancient Grudge in their graveyard rather. So the rack is likely going to get Ancient Grudged, but our opponent doesn't have green mana up. So they are going to at least take 3 from it. And I am going to go ahead and cast this Smallpox. Can't really afford to hold cards in hand with a Lily, but you know what? Our opponent top decked exactly what they needed. And that means we've got a really uphill battle from this point on. So we're in a top deck war. Unfortunately, our discard spells, and that's the reason why this deck doesn't want to be top decking, is the discard spells are not good in a top deck war. One of the vulnerabilities to playing this deck. However, if we draw the rack, Shrieking Affliction, Liliana, Smallpox, removal, there's a lot of solid draws we have. Very close to being able to ultimate that Lily. Notably, we could have ulted it the turn our opponent played that Goyf, but I believe that would have been a very bad decision at that point in time. So our opponent is correctly not sacrificing that Mishra's Bauble until now, so that we're not able to force our opponent to discard the extra card drawn from it. So our opponent's essentially going to draw 2 cards, and we're hoping that they're not good ones. Okay, 1 is a Goyf. That's bad. It's an 8/9 Tarmogoyf. That is a fair-sized creature. Wow. And yep, as I was mentioning, our top decking is just not cutting it. We've got this Goyf, which is actually, well, now our opponent's sacrificing the Spellbomb. I believe that makes the Goyf 1 smaller, so it actually turned our opponent from having a 2-turn clock into a 3-turn. Oh, but there's the claim. I didn't even see that. So, yep, that's going to do it here.